This RealAg Radio podcast episode is brought to you by Focus Herbicide from FMC. When tank mixed with glyphosate, Focus Herbicide provides a complete solution. Broadleaf burn-off and extended control on key grassy and broadleaf weeds like wild oats, bromes, and kochia in lentils, wheat, and more. See your local retailer or visit ag.fmc.com/ca today.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. And welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. Thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. And, of course, big shout out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast as well. Well, it is Friday. It's been another very busy week here at Real Agriculture in the agricultural news cycle for sure. We got a lot of stuff to talk about today on the RealAg Issues Panel. We're going to have a product spotlight with Genesis Fertilizers, and then we're going to get to the meat of the week and what happened. We got a new prime minister in Canada. That doesn't happen every day. How long could it be for? We're going to have an election here before you know it. At least that's what the speculation is. We got a cabinet announcement. Frequent guest of the show is the new Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food. We'll get to that, as well as some of the talk this week from U.S.-Canada trade relations perspective. And what's going on between Canada and China? And how does the U.S. play into that drama as well? If you have any feedback on today's program, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Also want to mention that for those of you listening to the RealAg Radio podcast, in the bonus segment today will be a brand new beef market update with Wasko at the Gateway Livestock Exchange. So make sure you download the RealAg Radio podcast wherever you get your podcasts so you can hear the beef market update. You know, had a great week of travel this week. I was in Grand Prairie, Alberta, had a lot of fun there, spoke to a great audience, the Cargill Market Sense customers from the Peace River region. I don't get up to the Peace enough. That's, and a whole bunch of great fans of Real Agriculture. Had a great night, talked about a lot of really the issues of the day. Good questions from the audience. And that was really a lot of fun, and I really appreciate Cargill for inviting me to did 3 events, Brandon, Camrose, and Grand Prairie, and finished up this week in the Peace. So it was great. So great to see everybody out there that attended the event, and I do appreciate it. Hey, make sure you tune in to the Agronomists on Monday night. It is Real Ag in Prime Time live. Lyndsey Smith always has some great agronomic guests, and this Monday will be no different. You can tune into that 8 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Mountain, on realagriculture.com/live or on the Real Agriculture YouTube channel. And as well, one more promo item I want to make sure you're aware of. You can subscribe to all the free Real Agriculture newsletters. We've got a Western Canadian update, Eastern Canada, machinery, cattle, dairy, mind your farm business, and all the different schools as well. You just got to go to realagriculture.com/subscribe. Okay, let's take a break. And when we come back, we're going to have a product spotlight with Genesis Fertilizers right after this. Big thanks to AGI for having us down here at Commodity Classic. Joined right now by Jeff Cruzen, Dryer Business Development Rep.
With a dryer, it's almost like an insurance policy. It allows you that flexibility to start your harvest earlier and control your harvest operations. We know we're going to have to dry some of it. We hope we don't have to dry all of it. The problem with taking your grain to a commercial operation to be dried is you're at their mercy. You don't have that flexibility. If it gets full, they have to shut down for the day. When you have your own dryer, then you have total control about how your harvest is going to move forward. Maybe you have an off-farm job. You need to have that flexibility to harvest your corn, but still hold your off-farm job. Let's say you're coming to me and you say, Jeff, what do I need for a dryer? What's an average harvest day for you? And then we're going to say, what's a big harvest day for you? And then we'll size the dryer around that. So we're going to plan for today, but we're also going to talk about where you're headed to in the future. A dryer is a large capital investment, but you also need to plan where you're going to be, not where you are today.
You can reach out to Jeff by going to egggrowth.com.
What people are excited about right now is Excite BioYield Plus. It's a phosphate-solubilizing ag biological that works on oilseeds, cereals, and legumes. I'm Eva Smuck, and I work at Excite Biotechnologies. For over a decade, we have been helping farmers to achieve healthier plants and better yields with our premium liquid inoculants. You can learn more by calling 1-855-EXCITE-BIO or by searching Excite Bio online. That's XITEBIO.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am Lyndsey Smith, and it is time now for today's Product Spotlight. Joining me now is Kathy Jordison. She's a director on the board of directors for Genesis Fertilizers. Kathy, how are you?
I'm good.
Wonderful. Okay, so thank you so much for joining me today. We are going to talk about Genesis Fertilizers. How will Genesis Fertilizers help mitigate risks related to pricing, supply chain disruption, and input costs for farmers?
Oh, as we all know, the price of inputs goes up and down, and it's always propagated on the idea that we're competing against imports. So imports coming in end up pricing your inputs on the ground. Now, what happens with an investment in Genesis is that the price going up and down won't matter so much to the fertilizer, the farmer who's getting their fertilizer from the plant, who's actually a shareholder in the plant, because if it goes up, their profitability goes up because they get paid at the end of the year what the profit of the plant is. Now, currently that profit goes to shareholders and to companies that are not necessarily Canadian companies. Just about all of them have their head offices outside our country. So you end up with the farmers having more of a footprint in what would be their input costs. But it ends up being the select few that put their money into the plant who get the huge amount of profit. The other ones just benefit because there's more product available in Western Canada. So it helps mitigate the price risk.
Now, with consolidation, of course, we know that there is plenty of consolidation in the ag sector. How does a project like this help preserve independence for farmers?
Yeah, the consolidation has been interesting over time. And I started in the industry when that plant, the Belle Plaine plant, was built by the government in Cargill. Brilliant move on their part. They ended up putting product into Western Canada that at the time nobody thought there was a need for. But the change in cropping and the change of crops changed that. So what this plant ends up doing in the long run for Western Canada, it provides them a source of fertilizer. And it provides them a source of fertilizer that's in Canada. So you end up with mitigating some of the risks that you have when you associate fertilizer with imports. Because you then stop the imports scenario as much as it was. So you can, if somebody uses that, a supplier uses that, you can say, well, yeah, but I can go down the street and get it from another plant in Western Canada.
Now, you, of course, as we mentioned, you sit on the board of Genesis Fertilizers. What stands out to you about this model, and where do you see this project sort of shaping the industry over the next 5 to 10 years?
What's interesting about this model is, and it's slightly different than the original Belle Plaine build, but the original Belle Plaine build was the provincial government that was involved in it. Now you have farmers that are involved in it. So this changes the makeup of inputs in Western Canada in that the farmers get more power. I mean, for them, they then are basically controlling one of the big plants. I mean, and it will be one of the big plants. Not only it'll be on the same as the original Belle Plaine plant, but it'll be newer. So it'll be better efficiency because newer plants are. But it'll be up against plants that are older, and how long will those plants survive without having to put a lot of money in it? So it kind of allows the farmers in Western Canada get more control over their own destiny, to have their hands on an input source.
All right. Now, Kathy, where can interested farmers go for more information about the Genesis Fertilizers project?
The Genesis website has the information in there and who they can contact. And we've got all kinds of people out on the road trying to get people to invest in it. So yeah, probably start first at the Genesis website.
That is genesisfertilizers.com. You've got all the information there on the build, on how to be involved, and where this location will be, and updates, of course, for the project. Kathy, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
All right. Thank you.
All right. We'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this.
At Alliance Seed, every seed starts the story of your success. With Alliance Seed varieties, you're not just planting seeds, you're planting the promise of a prosperous future. Our top-performing wheat, barley, oat, pea, and lentil varieties are tailored to meet the unique challenges of your farm, ensuring high yields, strong standability, and reliable disease resistance. Discover the Alliance difference at allianceseed.com or call 1-877-270-2890.
We are here at the Helena booth. Joining us is Alex Park,
the division agronomist for Wyoming, Colorado, West Nebraska, and West Kansas.
Heading into this 25 season, what are some of the agronomic things that growers are thinking about?
Efficiency, period. There's a lot of unknowns, so if we can take the edge off our risk by increasing the efficiency of, particularly on our fertility programs, and making sure that our fertility programs deliver us ecosystem services where things like phosphorus and potassium can deliver drought resilience, de-risks my operation, can be really huge for us. If I could beg anybody to do one thing, is take a soil test. Find out what is in your bank. You spend a lot of money on this land. What's in the ground? How can we efficiently extract the nutrients at a reasonable pace at the right time? You can't do that without a soil test. Find out what your investment is, and that's going to let you make the right decisions on your fertility program. And if you don't have that, you're starting from a place where how much nutrients is that crop going to extract, and that's not as efficient as you could be.
Make sure you go to resurge.innovate-ag.ca or HelenaAgra.com. And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. It's time for the RealAg Issues Panel. Big issues that happening this week. We got a new Prime Minister today. We got a cabinet. Maybe we're going to have an election sooner than later. There are lots to break down and talk about. But first, I want to tell you about Excite Bio. Excite Biotechnologies is a Canadian company providing made-in-Canada inoculants and biologicals. From nitrogen to phosphorus, let us help you find the best solution. You can reach them at 1-855-XITEBIO or excitebio.ca. Okay, let's get to the panel. Up first, Lyndsey Smith coming out of Ottawa, Ontario. Lyndsey, how goes it?
Well, tomorrow, officially, Windows Open Day.
Oh.
So, yeah, it's going to be like 15 degrees. So it is the changing of the winter air for the spring air in the house. I am opening every window. That's my plan. And just let that warm air rush in.
Yeah.
It's official. Yeah. So anyway.
That's a sign of spring.
That is. We still have tons of snow, everybody. Don't take this like it's not like we're going to be planting anytime soon. But I will tell you that given the pace of the news cycle the past couple weeks and the snow and the cold, this is a welcome, sunshine, happy spring. Spring's coming. Yeah. So it's good.
Also joining us here today is Kelvin Heppner coming out of Altona, Manitoba. Kelvin, how are you doing?
Doing well, and we have other signs of spring showing up here, including the Cobra chickens. The Canada geese have been flying this week, the last few days. So I wish we could actually tariff them and maybe put up a border wall or something to keep them south of the border.
I would like
rename them. We should name them America geese or something like that. The Gulf of Mexico can be renamed. We should rename that yes. Iconic.
I would rather have a tariff on pigeons.
Well, they are kind of like pigeons. They're in the same nuisance category, I think.
Rats with wings.
Yeah, pigeons are rats with wings, but Cobra chickens are they're rude, and they carry avian influenza, and they kill your winter wheat, and they're just rude.
They attack you on the golf course.
They attack a lot of people a lot of times.
Vicious.
They ruin sidewalks and parks.
Yes.
Cities. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, anyway.
Well,
yeah.
Lyndsey, you're opening your windows as a sign of spring. Yeah. I was in Grand Prairie, Alberta earlier this week, and the snow was flying. The farm, apparently it was like in double digits the week prior. I went during an unfortunate week, but I had a great time with some Cargill Market Sense customers, but it was wintry, very wintry.
So I would like everyone, all our American friends listening, to go look on a map as to where Grand Prairie is. You were way out there.
Oh, you're north.
Like, it's far. Like, you're almost in Alaska.
So... I don't know. Yeah, maybe. But one of the most underrated John Wayne movies, North to Alaska. Great movie. God. Great movie. Lost what I was going to say. Oh, I know. A lot of, we think about geography, like a lot of times we talk about, like if you're at, there's points in Canada, like Leamington, where you're actually south of Detroit is one. Yep. And if you went all the way across, you'd hit Northern California. The other one that we sort of forget about geography is that Edmonton is central Alberta.
Yes.
Like we think of it as northern Alberta, but the Peace region, and there's more acres, sorry, Kelvin, there's more acres of of farming production in the Peace River region than all of Manitoba. Did you know that one, Kelvin?
I did not know. Wow.
Yep.
I like that he apologized to you for that one, Kelvin.
I'm not slighting Manitoba. I'm just giving.
I feel like you were.
Just running with some facts. But, in an area like the Peace region, logistics and transport are you're thinking about what crops can I grow that I can get the heck out of here. Yeah. We're going to get to we have a new prime minister, but on that note, let's talk about the rail performance, Kelvin. Is it all due to cold weather? Because the railways, according to the Ag Transport Coalition, things aren't really rosy in the performance area?
Cold weather is a factor, yes, as they have their cold weather plans where when temperatures drop below a certain point, they have to run shorter trains, brakes don't work as well, that kind of thing, just for safety reasons. And yeah, that is a factor, as we have had some deep freezes in Western Canada this winter. But yeah, overall rail performance this winter has kind of been quietly not talked about a whole lot, but has been really poor. The latest weekly statistics, this is from last week from the Ag Transport Coalition, showed CN Rail fulfilling 70% of hopper car orders, and CP down at 39% altogether. They were at 57% of hopper car orders in Grain Week 30 were fulfilled in that week, and so. Yeah, that's not reliable service. That's not what grain elevators want, especially when we have some of these trade issues regarding exports and deadlines to meet in terms of getting stuff to market or on a boat and that kind of thing. And so, yeah, it's certainly something that deserves attention. And as you alluded to, the Ag Transport Coalition is again raising this issue and calling on government. And we're heading into an election period, of course, where this type of priority and certainly will be discussed in the context of all the trade happenstances right now as well.
Well, speaking of just trade and all that kind of stuff, so we have a new prime minister today.
We do.
It is Mark Carney. Cabinet has been unveiled. We've got Kody Blois as the new Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food. Hey, frequent guest here on RealAg Radio. So that clearly is a launch point for people's political careers, is to be a guest here. I'm totally.
That's where we're going.
Any ideas, Tyler McCann and Megan
Murdoch,
Jeff Nielsen,
Carolyn
Nagel,
all of you. Goodness.
Yeah, we're it's like
sensing a trend.
Yeah. But outside of Canada, it's interesting. There's been a bit of I would say the narrative is this is a fresh start for Canadian relations with the rest of the world. Prime Minister Trudeau got a lot of, I would say, negative attention in terms of Canada's relationship in the world for a number of different reasons. Not with all countries, not with Europe, I wouldn't say, but definitely with China, India, the U.S. Come to mind. Lyndsey, is this a fresh start?
That's a really good question. It is, I guess, in a way. Although if you look at, and we've got a post up at RealAgriculture.com, you can go see who's all in cabinet, et cetera. It is a much smaller cabinet. A lot of familiar faces, right? So some juggling of who's going to do what. Again, this may also only be the cabinet for a couple weeks, really, in that we may be going to an election. Mark Carney, though, I mean, it is a new leader. So a new leader, a new prime minister has at least a chance to sort of set the tone for relationships, for discussions, etc. His itinerary has him headed to Europe, to Paris here shortly. We're waiting to see when he plans to meet with his U.S. counterpart, if at all, or how that's going to work. He says we need some respect first before that happens. So, yeah, is it a chance to? I suppose it is, but at the same time, a lot of the major cabinet positions are held by the same people that were under Trudeau. One of the ones that I find interesting, Chrystia Freeland named to transport. I'm a little surprised she's actually still in cabinet from both perspectives. She is someone, if we're thinking about, U.S., if we're thinking about Trump, not someone that Trump particularly cares for. And at the same time, she also ran for the leadership, did not win. I just find it odd that she'd take the position, to be honest. So I sort of find it strange from both perspectives. And I don't know if that is really a fresh start, if you have most of the same faces.
Yeah, and I think that's something the Conservatives can really latch on to, potentially, which they kind of haven't yet. Kelvin, I guess, what are some of the names in cabinet that stick out to you?
Sure. So, yeah, like Lyndsey said, and like you talked about, Shaun, a lot of the same faces here. Sure, the leader has changed. The captain, the first-line center has changed with Mark Carney replacing Justin Trudeau, but the wingers and the rest of the starting lineup, a lot of it looks very much the same. We have Francois Philippe Champagne, or Frankie Bubbles, as we like to call him, Minister of Finance. So there's been some shuffling here.
We do?
It's a fantastic name, Shaun. That's obviously...
Frankie Bubbles. It's a play on him in many ways. His personality is very bubbly for anybody who's seen him in interviews or in a speaking in a room, in a meeting, that kind of thing. So yeah, Frankie Bubbles as our finance minister. Dominic LeBlanc is the Minister of International Trade and Governmental Affairs. Melanie Joly remains as Minister of Foreign Affairs. Anita Anand is Minister of Innovation. We did see Stephen Guilbeault remain in cabinet as Quebec Lieutenant and Minister of Canadian Culture and Identity, so he's not on the environment file directly anymore. That's Terry Duguid, the Liberal MP from Winnipeg, that is now the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. And then, as alluded to earlier, Kody Blois, our new Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food, as well as Rural Economic Development, added on to his title, replacing Lawrence McCauley. So, yeah, some familiar big names there. Other than Kody is, of course, a rookie to cabinet, joining and has a lot of experience as the House Ag Committee chair, and he was recently promoted to Parliamentary Secretary of Agriculture. And we, as we've heard on this Friday show in the past, when Kody joined us, he is well versed, has a good understanding of Canadian agriculture, and he's a strong communicator, a strong speaker. And so it'll be interesting to see how having him in that role, what changes versus the last number of years or the last, I guess it wasn't years that Minister McCauley was in his second stint, but what the changes versus McCauley to Blois in the Ag Minister portfolio.
Yeah. So. And congratulations.
With 10 days on the job. With only 10 days on the job, probably, before the election is called. We go into a caretaker government. But, we'll see.
I was thinking,
if the Liberals win the election, if that is what the polls are showing is a possibility, too.
It helps him in his riding, for sure. Hey, look, if I win this, because, he's in a fight for re-election that he has talked about, that, he definitely has interest in staying in government. I thought about some of the things, the commonalities between Nova Scotia and Texas. So Ag Secretary Rollins from Texas, a proud Texan, and Kody is a very proud Nova Scotian. So some of the things they have in common, and actually there's more, like when you really start to put pen to paper, there's actually more than you think. So like a very strong culture around food, very strong culture around music, known to be like tough, resilient kind of people, rural-based economy, also strong regional identity. You think about the how the East Coast in Canada has that very like strong identity that's different than, say, the Central Canada or Western Canada, for example. Texas obviously has its its own history of independence and things like that. So I'm interested to see. I think there's opportunity here for if even though this may be short-lived, there's a good opportunity to get the relationship off to a good start between Secretary Rollins and Kody Blois for sure.
I think they're both strong communicators. They both do TV with that kind of like.
Yeah.
I think Kody, if I was in a director of communications or on staff for him, I would have him on U.S. Ag Media. I would have him on RealAg. I would have him on all the U.S. Ag Media in the next 10 days before the election is called, because I think he can communicate well the case for trade between Canada and the U.S. and why these tariffs are a bad idea for the overall ag industry.
Well, I can help out. I'm actually the host of Agri-Talk next Friday. There you go.
Minister Blois, give us a call. We have to call him that now, guys.
I should
Can't call
have
him Kody.
have Minister Blois as a guest on Agri Talk next Friday.
Okay,
It's a really good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, epigenetics brings new seed genetics to Canadian farms, empowering growers to thrive in an ever-changing amount of conditions, and there are a lot of different conditions. Visit fpgenetics.ca to discover FP's dynamic portfolio of seed and to contact your local territory manager, gain a genetic advantage, and experience the next wave with FP Genetics. We are rocking here on the RealAg Issues Panel. We'll be back right after this.
There's power, and then there's superpower. Advancing the unstoppable superpower of pre-seed from New Farm. Take control. Eliminate weed competition and start clean in spring. Manage weeds early in canola, cereals, and pulses. Conquer, Goldwing, Thunderhawk, and Blackhawk EVO. Convenient formulations and multiple modes of action. Add more power to glyphosate, more benefits to your burn down. Go to newfarm.ca/burndown.
It's summertime, and you've got a lot of important decisions to make when it comes to your corn crop. Let the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com help guide you through those big decisions with input from leading experts in the field. If it's spray timing, disease identification, or any other field issue, the Corn School's got you covered. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
Hey, Kelvin, I'm really interested in, springtime. You put the crop in. Are you super focused on that even emergence?
That's definitely very important in spring. Yes.
Critical. And one of the ways you do that is you're pulling around some Vaterstat equipment. Vaterstat is partnering with Canadian farmers for outstanding emergence. So be just like Kelvin. Their line of tillage, seeding, and planting equipment offers solutions for all soil types, field conditions, and tillage practices, helping you maximize yield. To learn more and find your local dealer, visit vaterstad.com. I think we got to get Kelvin, Lyndsey, like a influencer contract where he's doing like selfie videos of him and his Vaterstat equipment. He doesn't have Vaterstat, but he's going to. I know he's going to in the future.
Just give it some time. Yeah.
I like
what
it.
is it?
High-speed planters.
Yeah.
Right.
The tempo.
Yep.
Tempo.
I like the tempo. We always do good interviews. I'll never forget. It might have been like Agri-Technic, 2017 or something like that. And I don't know, Kelvin, if you remember this, doing an interview with a Vaterstad technical person about I think it was at the Temple Planter, and the CEO came over and literally I didn't mean to, but he sort of shoved the person out of the way mid-interview so that he could do it because he wanted to talk to us. It was pretty funny and hilarious. I wish we had that blooper reel. It was
we might
good.
Somewhere.
We might,
anyway.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's keep on going here. Let's talk about China. And Friday night, late, the news cycle never sleeps, especially in today's world. As I've had at some of the presentations and keynotes, the audience is like, I don't know how you guys are doing it. Have you guys slept? Not enough.
Coffee.
Not enough. This is all brought to you by Monster Energy drinks. And China drops significant tariffs on Canada related to pork, canola meal, oil, and field peas. Now, not on seed, but that one's still potentially coming.
That's right.
Kelvin, this has created a real bind for Canada. Talk about it.
This is where Canada is squeezed, and we now have trade war on two fronts. In some ways, this trade war was already in effect with China over electric vehicles, steel, aluminum. Canada put these levies in place last fall, and that's what this is retaliation for Canada having put that 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles, of course, working in lockstep with the U.S. administration on that in terms of protecting North America's auto sector and keeping those jobs in Michigan and Ontario and everywhere else where vehicles are built in North America. And so that's where the retaliation now has been drawn from. And so Canada is squeezed between the U.S. and China here on the canola front, where we need to, of course, work with the U.S. geographically and otherwise our most important trading partner. And of course, that front is under major attack right now as well. but now China putting this tariff on canola. And so what's the Canadian government supposed to do? Are we supposed to let off on is the Canadian government supposed to let off on the EV tariffs? That would certainly help the canola situation with China, but it would upset the Americans, and there could potentially be retribution for that on the American front. And so it is a complicated situation, and certainly not having a government or at least a lame duck prime minister until today, and an election around the corner, everybody in temporary seats right now in cabinet, as we talked about last segment. It's unlikely, I think, that we will see quick resolution to this until after the election.
The consequences of removing the EV tariffs could actually be worse than the actual EV tariffs in place. And that's kind of the challenge.
Yeah, but there's a lot of unknowns there. That could be worse for the Canadian economy as a whole, but maybe not target canola. I don't know. At least that's I think a canola, from a Western Canadian canola grower's perspective, it certainly looks like, again, and this is something we've seen plenty of discussion about this week, and people really fired up, including Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe, that this is another example of the Canadian government making an intentional policy decision to benefit auto at the cost of other industries in Western Canada, and it certainly it is that, although it is more complicated, like John.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. So at the surface level, I understand that whole, 100%. Like, I get that. And I like an angry Scott Moe. Like, hashtag angry Moe. I like that. He gets fired up. He gets rolling. And they are concerned about those domestic crush facilities. But the other thing that they're concerned about when it comes to those domestic crush facilities in Saskatchewan is, what does it look like from an export perspective to the U.S. for canola? And so that needs to be a consideration here too. There is some 3D chess that's being played. I'm not saying we're playing it very well. We're involved in a 3D chess game, and again, Canada's caught between the U.S. and China, and you said it, being squeezed. Lyndsey, how did you say, Lyndsey?
We're caught between a rock and a hard place, and we're paying for it. It's like we paid to be put between. So and this is, I think, the really difficult part of all this. Exactly. And 3D chess is maybe another great way to think about it, is that realistically, it seems like on the surface, it's like, okay, we put these EV tariffs in place at the behest, essentially, of our U.S. at the time friends. Clearly, that has not worked out super great. At the same time, we are trying to sort out this new trade relationship with the U.S. And this is something we could potentially be saying, like, look, we will keep this in place, etc. But then China, I don't know if it's the rock or the hard place, doesn't matter at this point, doesn't want that to happen either. So it isn't as simple. I think that is very clear, that it's not as simple as just take it away because the U.S. made us mad, because that has consequences too. At the same time, I do think what I'm sort of surprised by, and I shouldn't be surprised, that this does hurt, of course, Canadian agriculture, and especially Western Canadian agriculture particularly hard. Of course, also our pork sector, seafood. But I haven't seen nearly the mainstream media attention on this topic versus the U.S. issue. And dollars-wise, this is a huge issue. So I agree with hashtag angry Mo that, this very much is, again, a very Canadian thing to do, where we're sort of not necessarily getting, like, the Canadian people should be just as ticked off at China, and we're not. But we also did this for the U.S. We put this 100% tariff in place, in solidarity with the U.S. Like, anyway, I'm frustrated that we're not, as a nation, paying as much attention to this as we are with our relationship with the U.S.
So go ahead, Kelvin.
I was just going to quickly say, and maybe we're playing too much devil's advocate here, but if you look at Canada's steel and aluminum exports to the U.S. last year were $35 billion, I believe, and the exports to China that are affected by these tariffs are less than $3 billion. So from a government perspective, and that deadline is March 20th. It wasn't Wednesday like it was for the steel and aluminum tariffs this week, or Tuesday, I guess it was. Yeah. It's all running together here. So from a government perspective, but at the same time, like you say, Lyndsey, this is extremely critical for Western Canada. I did some quick math here. As of December 31st, Stats Can reported there was about 440 million bushels of canola still on Canadian farms in farmers' bins. And if I look at our local cash bids for May at our local crush plant here, they dropped over $2 from a week ago on Friday to today. They are down more than $2 a bushel, so that's $900 million out of Western Canadian farmers' pockets in this last week due to this. So
I think there should be compensation.
That brings up the conversation about compensation. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I hate whataboutism, so I'll participate in it. We have compensated other sectors for market losses in the past. This is not necessarily a permanent one. I get that, but we've seen heading into planting. I think there should be more of a consideration, not just increased loans that people have to pay back, or maybe a break in interest rates. I think we need more of an American-style ad hoc program here, as the American farmer is about to get $9.7 billion here in the next 30 days for 2024 market losses because the market went down. Not even a trade spat, just the market went down. So I think that needs to be more of a consideration given the circumstances and the way that the canola farmer, for example, as well as aquaculture and some other areas, how they're taking it on the chin and, to use it, America being very good Canadian patriots for taking the loss. I think there needs to be more of a consideration for that. But I will say this before we take a break. One of our ways out of this issue, this trade issue with the United States, is more of a fortress around North America. And you're hearing Mexico talk about, hey, we will potentially look at putting tariffs on China alongside you if we can work out some sort of a deal. And so this is, if you think that there's a bit of a strategy to what the U.S. side's doing, it is to potentially put a wall around North America and work as more of a North American economy. It doesn't feel like that today, but that is potentially one of our ways that to get out of this trade war that we are, this needless trade war that we're currently in. So one way to look at this is we could see more tariffs on Chinese goods as opposed to less going forward more in the long term. So send us your feedback on that little nugget. Haney at RealAgriculture.com. Hey, before we take a break, I do want to mention how you can maximize productivity and profitability with an innovative all-in-one approach to farming, combining accounting, business planning, agronomic field planning, and advanced technology. M&P Ag Intellect delivers personalized solutions that empower you to make confident, data-driven decisions. Visit mmp.ca to learn more. We'll be right back on RealAg Radio right after this.
If you're applying a low-rate N stabilizer, you might be falling for a losing strategy. Low-rate products promise great results, but may lack the potency of higher active ingredient concentrations, so great isn't always what you get. Don't put yield at risk. Put your trust in proven solutions. Anvol Nitrogen Stabilizer, Super U Premium Fertilizer, and Tribune Nitrogen Stabilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. These products offer higher active ingredient concentrations imitator brands can't match. See the difference at defendyourn.ca.
Find everything you need for outstanding weed control in your wheat and barley from the cross-spectrum herbicide experts at Corteva. Corteva is proud to offer a wide selection of cross-spectrum herbicides for maximum convenience, effective resistance management, and customized control of your toughest grassy and broadleaf weeds. No matter what kind of weed challenges you're experiencing, we've got the right fit for your farm. Visit Corteva.ca to learn more.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us here each and every day. We love doing this show, a lot of passion for the industry. And just, I'm at the end of all the different speeches and keynotes and moderating panels. It was a wild and woolly first 3 months of 2025. No shortage of air miles, I guess, and hotel rooms. But it is so great to interact with so many members of the audience across Canada. I think I did 7 provinces since November. I have been in and talked in, and so it has been a great experience, and I really do appreciate everybody that makes us very much a part of their workday. Hey, don't put your yield at risk. Put your trust in proven solutions. Anvil Nitrogen Stabilizer, Super U, Premium Fertilizer, and Tribune Nitrogen Stabilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. These products offer higher active ingredient concentrations imitator brands can't match. Nobody hates an imitator more than me. See the difference at defendyourn.ca. That is defendyourn.ca. Okay, so one of the things that comes up a lot in some of the different keynotes that I've done, gang, and we got Lyndsey Smith, Kelvin Heppner of RealAgriculture joining me here, is what happens, when are we going to have an election? Lyndsey, it seems all the smart money, to use a Vegas term, is kind of banking on late April, probably more mid-May.
That's right. So the going consensus is that it is highly unlikely that this parliament resumes. So we are still prorogued. And now that Prime Minister Mark Carney is a thing as of today and has a cabinet, it does seem that likely sometime next week we will get an election call. The writ will drop. I believe we have a maximum of 51 days for an election to happen. So it has to be between 37 and 51 days from the time, and it has to be on a Monday. So if you put all of that in a bowl, stir it around, it puts us probably early May is the most likely, maybe a week either side of that. So, realistically, I think most people that I've talked to anyway are glad to hear it. I've heard a lot of, this is what Justin Trudeau should have just done anyway, instead of, resigning and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, but it does look like likely early May. So just in time for everybody to be in their cedars and planters. But either way, it does look like we will have a election, and an election that, yes, has been a long time coming, if you will, but the outcome seems to not necessarily be nearly so assured as even 3 months ago.
Well,
so that is interesting.
That's a massive understatement. You think of what would have happened in the timeline to this whole story. At the end of November, mid-November, Prime Minister Trudeau says, you know what, I'm going to call an election. We have an election before Christmas. Conservatives win in a landslide. Super majority. You move now to the middle of March. It is a neck-and-neck race. The polls are really showing, Kelvin, that this is not at all in the bag for the Conservatives, and there is a path for another minority Liberal government.
Yeah, exactly. And at first I found some of these polls hard to believe, but so far they are all showing the same trend here, and that is, I think overall the plurality would still show the Conservatives forming government if an election was held today, but the trend is, like you said, neck and neck, and the Liberals are gaining. And so we'll have to see whether the Liberals' fortunes here have peaked with Mark Carney. The excitement around a new leader, the fact that he's not Justin Trudeau is the main thing that people are, I think, is attracting people back to the Liberal Party. It's not Trudeau. That's the same reason why people were going to support Poilievre until Trudeau announced his resignation as well. And so the not Trudeau factor has now tipped from the Conservatives to helping the Mark Carney and the Liberals, even though his cabinet is largely the same. And so that's where I think, as people get to know Mark Carney a little bit better here in the coming weeks, whether some of the shine will come off of the Liberal momentum here. But at the same time, Donald Trump and the Trump administration has really changed the game board here. It's if Poilievre thought he was playing Candyland and now we're playing Snakes and Ladders or something. You thought you were playing checkers, now you're playing chess. So whatever analogy, the game board has been flipped, and it's a totally different game now with Canadians certainly at the top of the list having concerns about trade with the U.S. and the Canada-U.S. relationship, and talk of 51st state, and all of those things have certainly taken the place of the carbon tax and some of the things that the Conservatives had built their strong support on.
What I found interesting this week, too, so we've seen the Trump factor pushing people back to the Liberal Party, thinking the Liberals will be tougher on Trump than the Conservatives, and right or wrong, or reality dreamt up, whatever, that's the perception that Canadians, specifically older Canadians, according to Abacus data, we had David Coletto on the show last week where he talked about that. What I find interesting, this is not isolated to Canada. The Wall Street Journal had a story this week talking about how it's the same thing's happening in Mexico, except they've already had their election. President Sheinbaum, who is really from the hard left, she has an all-time popularity right now of 85%, that's astonishing. So while the rest of the world, we're talking about, the Trump factor has been pushing more countries to the right, who's the Trump candidate, and they've had more of the momentum. In North America, the two countries that are adjacent to the U.S., it's been the opposite direction of the politics. I find that absolutely fascinating. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think it is fascinating. Perhaps its proximity plays a role.
Yeah.
Or perhaps, that Trump being reelected is, perhaps the top of the pendulum swing and we now end up going the other way. I definitely think that realistically, I don't know that as much as we knew Trump's second administration was going to be disruptive and difficult, I don't think anyone could have predicted just how volatile and chaotic it is and has been, in which case I'm not entirely surprised to see the polls moving as much as they are, because it's no longer the same race here in Canada. It really, the fundamental, even though, yes, our affordability problem still exists, our housing problem still exists, like the fundamentals of our economy still have the same factors, but now we've got this whole other layer that didn't exist, and there is so much riding on who leads us through this next while. And so it has just fundamentally shifted where the decisions that we have to make as Canadians. And so it also means that the political parties have to do the same. Right. And I think ultimately, I feel like no one, like the NDP and Jagmeet Singh are, I don't know, is anyone even noticing that we have third or fourth parties? I don't know that they are. It really is going to be between the Liberals and Conservatives. And I really feel like the Poilievre camp really has to do some pivoting here. And perhaps Kelvin and I were talking about this, that, we like to see what ads are being played and, where they're being targeted. And I'll be honest, I'm not seeing a lot, of the Poilievre support ads. So maybe I'm watching the wrong media, but I'm not seeing a ton of them. And so it's interesting to see how the polls are shifting and how the comms team for the Conservatives is going to handle this next election period. It will be very fascinating.
Well, my free advice is they have to transition from trying to tear down Carney to outlining what the vision is for Canada under a Conservative government.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
That's a shift, because opposition Poilievre loves to attack. He is a dog on a bone. And people wanted that when it was about Trudeau. Carney does not have the same, there's no story yet, right? And so you're sort of attacking into the abyss. And so I think they need to switch and be maybe a little bit more positive and show and talk about to Canadians what they are going to do to try to eliminate some of this, basically the Liberals, which they're very good at. The Liberal Party has a history of this. I heard Dwayne Bratt out of Mount Royal University on Michael Smerconish's show on POTUS this week, talking about how the Liberal Party has a history of comparing the Conservative Party to an American Republican. And it's rinse and repeat. And whether it's Poilievre to Trump, or it's Mulroney to Reagan, or it's Harper to Bush, this is an old strategy that has worked in the past, and so they got to combat it. Kelvin, what's your thoughts?
The Liberals also have a history. The Liberals are a party that's about power and whatever it takes.
Oh, you went on mute there, buddy.
To be in power.
Oh,
I'm on mute.
No, you got you now. Go ahead.
Go again.
My internet connection is unstable, it says. The Liberals have a history of being a party that's about being in power, not as ideological as the Conservatives and NDP. And we saw the Liberals line up with the NDP the last few years with the Confidence and Supply Agreement. Now we've seen Carney take the Liberals to the Conservative side, of the small c Conservative side of the spectrum, in terms of taking away the carbon tax and eliminating the capital gains changes and all these other things that Poilievre and the Conservatives have been rallying around. And so they've taken some things off the table, though. To me, the question is whether this is actually, Shaun, earlier you talked about you don't have time for imitators or impersonators. Now the time is, or now we're going to see whether Carney, this is the real Carney, or whether the books that he's written and what the policies he stood for the last 2 decades of his public life, whether that's the real Carney. Because certainly, to me, the direction he's taken the party doesn't fit with his public persona when it comes to the books about moving to net zero and focusing on the focus is on the climate and all of those things, not on driving productivity and Canada's economy being more competitive and that type of thing. So it'll be interesting to see whether the voters get to know that Mark Carney, or whether this is just not Trudeau Carney leading Liberals.
Yeah. Well, we're going to find out quickly. We're going to find out very quickly. Very quickly. most likely before, as we talked about before, May long weekend. Hey, dairy back in the news, right? Like all of a sudden we're talking about dairy again. Kelvin?
Did it leave? President Trump's talking about it almost every day these days.
Well, yeah, it's again, not a lot of time for nuance, but the tariffs that he's talking about are once the TRQs are filled. Now, just to remind everybody, the U.S. has some of the same sort of measures when it comes to refined and raw sugar imports. So we're not the only country that tariffs some products quite heavily and can be quite protectionist. But there's reports today that the Canada and the Americans are going to meet next week again, and dairy is one of the things that's on the agenda. Although Canada has said they will not talk about dairy, it's a hard no. They will not talk about dairy outside of a full USMCA renegotiation. So, Kelvin, this is going to be fascinating to see what we're doing.
Yeah, and that April 2nd deadline is looming with the reciprocal tariffs that the Trump administration made clear in that meeting yesterday between some of the federal and provincial officials from Doug Ford and LeBlanc, Champagne. We're in that meeting with Lutnick yesterday, Lutnick and Jameson Greer, the USTR, and apparently in that meeting it was made clear that April 2nd is a big day and they're moving ahead with those reciprocal tariffs, and anything that is going to happen will happen after April 2nd at this point. And so in the meantime, like you said, Shaun, meeting next week about dairy and Canada's digital tax on tech companies from the U.S. And so, yeah, we'll see whether there's any progress. I doubt anything happens there until after April 2nd is that's sort of the deadline that the Trump administration has set here. And ultimately, this comes down to whether the American electorate continues to be okay with what is happening on the trade front, as we see Trump's approval rating continues to trend lower overall, and certainly not in the MAGA crowd, but overall American support for Trump has been eroding here, and as cost of living inflation happens with tariffs, we will have to see whether that continues or whether people are okay with it.
But we have not seen the inflation yet. We had CPI and PPI numbers this week, and they kind of...
That was from before the tariffs.
Yeah, no, I know. But it was interesting. I was listening to Bloomberg Radio, and I think they were preparing for, look at that number. This is, and I think it kind of surprised to the downside compared to where some of the expectations were. But yes, you're right. That was pre.
Well, and I think that, I know we don't have a lot of time, but I think one of those things to remember when we talk about some of these numbers is you really do have to pay attention to when that number is from. And this is one of those things that we are caught up in the now, right? But these numbers are a reflection of before. And so it will take time to really capture what's happening. And of course, the stock market, if we just want to use that, that's not exactly going in America's favor. So we can use that as proxy too.
Well, we've got people on the strong supporters of President Trump on Fox Business and CNBC this week talking about how not only is the stock market going down a good thing long term for America, but also maybe it's not a bad thing if the U.S. is pushed into a recession.
Make it make sense, y'all. Make it make sense.
Try.
There's a lot of backwards logic these days.
It's opposite day around these parts for sure. Hey, today in the bonus segment, we got the beef market update because we weren't able to play it earlier. So Ann Wasko will be in the podcast version of the show. So stay tuned for that. Lyndsey, have yourself a great weekend.
You as well.
Same to you, Kelvin.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Okay, everybody. If you do have any feedback, some thoughts, I got some great feedback from last Friday's show from Canadian listeners and American listeners. Some awesome stuff. I had a great conversation with a farmer from Central Illinois. So keep that feedback coming. shaney@realagriculture.com or the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. And we'll, of course, chat again next week. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this RealAg Radio podcast brought to you by Focus Herbicide from FMC. Lentil and wheat growers get a clean start this spring with Focus Herbicide. Along with early burn-off and extended weed control, Focus Herbicide provides excellent resistance management. See your local retailer or visit ag.fmc.com/ca today.
And welcome to the bonus here on RealAg Radio here on this Friday. Usually we do this in-show, but we had a great product spotlight there with Genesis Fertilizer. So I'm going to play for you now the beef market update that I recorded on Friday morning with Ann Wasko, the Gateway Livestock Exchange. Here it is. And it is great to chat with you.
It's good to be here, Shaun.
So, I don't even know where to begin. I guess, how would you describe 2025? Is it just kind of volatility, chaos, uncertainty? Is that kind of what sort of fills the? Yeah, it is. Okay.
Yep. It sure does. It sure does. Whether it's been hour to hour, day to day, week to week. But kind of all over the map. And of course, the markets are responding as they go through the news. So, just for example, cash markets, in the US last week bounced back nicely. And this week held on to it. So for example, in the South, in Kansas, this week we were up $3 to $2 even. So if you remember, the markets had rallied, then settled back, and now they've kind of rallied back up again. In the North, not a whole bunch of trade this week in the Nebraska, Iowa areas, but there was a little bit at 204. So that'll be a couple bucks higher than last week. So certainly holding the gains from last week. If you're watching the futures markets, talking about volatility, looking at going back 10 days ago, April live cattle futures have rallied basically pretty much close to $2, up to $2 over 202, up $10 in 10 days, and after a big hit prior to that. So, and feeder cattle futures this week making new contract highs. So it has been erratic, to say the least.
What about the cash prices in Canada?
Well, last week, the market started off really tepid. Bids were not good at all. And then by the end of the week, when things looked a little bit better, we saw $450 delivered dressed. And that's what the price was again this week. So $450 delivered dressed. Canfax average last week came out at $265 in Alberta for fat cattle. And so will be similar to that again this week. The one comment I did want to make on the wholesale price, because it is following along with this. And so we did see a $6.50 jump in the choice cutout this week. So the markets are, they're in step with what's going on. So we closed just shy of 320 on the choice cutout last night. So, 10 days ago, it sure didn't look like this, but the markets have recovered as for now they feel okay, but who knows what the next turn brings.
And if you're listening to this and you're not in the beef business, you're probably like, hey, what's all the uncertainty and the chaos? Prices are strong. Producers are making money on the cow-calf side as well as the feed yard. So what's the problem? And my answer to that has been the integrated supply chain and just how connected all three countries are and how much under threat that is right now. That's where the uncertainty lies.
Absolutely. And just because that business is day to day, anytime you throw an uncertainty or a potentially extra cost or anything into that, then the whole markets react right from one end to the other. So good point. The one thing I also want to make in terms of the Alberta fed cattle marketings, and we've seen this really over the past 8 weeks basically, is pretty active selling. So again, when cattle feeders are feeling confident about something, and they think they've got some leverage, they'll maybe hold cattle, make cattle bigger. That was something we talked about a lot in 2024. That's not the case here in 2025. Cattle feeders have been very aggressively. Well, for that matter, Shaun, everyone in the chain has been selling pretty aggressively. So even those that have grass cattle to sell have been selling ahead of schedule. So we are seeing cattle feeders staying very current in Canada as they continue to sell very aggressively on the fat cattle market. Let's
talk about feeder imports and exports and that activity, because there's an example of the integration.
And I think that, as I made the notes for today's call, I just reminded me again just how confusing it must be for even those of us to see it all the time. So, for example, in this case, we just got from StatsCan our January feeder imports from the U.S. into Canada. And we did see 22,000 head of feeder cattle come north in the month of January. That's up 29% from last year. And again, so that is what it is. We do have preliminary export data for January and February for feeder cattle, and we're at 33,000 head heading south. Oh. So again, it's and that is up. So last year in the same 2 months, we would have exported about 12,000 head of feeder cattle. And again, it goes by what's happening to the market on a day-to-day basis. So again, as I mentioned on fat cattle, we've seen lots of exports. Same thing on feeder cattle, but also feeder cattle moving north. So again, some of these deals would have been done long in advance. Some are the nature of the day or the week, and so you see lots of different things going on. Also beef. So that was, we were talking about feeder cattle there just in those comments. We did get some data, February beef imports coming into Canada up 27%. Not a big surprise if you remember 2024 was up as well. North American has a very strong lean trim market right now. Think cow beef in your head. And so we were attracting product from Australia and New Zealand. And that's the case again. We even saw imports from the US up 17%. So again, things flow back and forth depending on the product, the cut, the day, the price, Canadian dollar, whatever it might be. So that's the story there. We did get January beef exports. We're down 1%, but it was interesting to see. And again, 1 month doesn't tell us a lot, but it's interesting just to see in January, we did ship 28% more beef to Japan. And we saw big increases both in South Korea and Hong Kong compared to January of 2024. So that's the kind of data we'll be watching. But it has been erratic as it's watching what's going on in the markets.
Yeah, again, like you mentioned on the feeder cattle side, and when you look at beef imports and exports, this idea that, because what I've heard from some of the audience at Real Agriculture is because of the challenges right now between Canada and the U.S., people have said, "Hey, wait a minute here, let's just forget about the U.S. market and let's just find other markets for our products. If they don't want our products, somebody else will." And some of the data you shared here, that's a little easier said than done. One, because of the size of the U.S. market, it's the number one economy in the world. Transportation, logistics, it's adjacent to Canada. That's another fact. And trade with China not so great right now either, especially on the pork and canola side. We're very export focused as a country, but we also require, because of the product types, we require imports as well, right? And I want you to just maybe give us the why again. I know you hit on it very briefly, but just hit on the why of that again.
So certainly on the import side, Canada has been for many, many years short needing lean trim, manufacturing beef. In a nutshell, Canadians eat more hamburgers or hamburger type beef than we produce. And even through a sell-off of the cow herd, that's been true. So we're in need. And of course, you want to supply customers with beef. If they want to eat beef, then certainly we'll import it. And so that's always been a part of our marketplace. And then, of course, filling in other spots in terms of in central and eastern Canada, big part of our population. Again, at times, Western Canada can't always supply all of the beef that needs to, of certain cuts, high-end cuts that need to happen there. So we will import those from the U.S. So again, it really depends on the market, on the day, but we are traditionally short of hamburger-type beef in Canada year in and year out.
When we look at our January results of the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index, we're going to have new data for April here in about a month. But when you look at how producers feel about their current farm financial performance and their future farm financial performance, there is a big difference between people in the cropping sector versus people that are in the livestock sector. And when you look at people in the beef sector, they feel even better about their current farm financial performance. We definitely have that separation going on right now when you look across the board, different types of farms.
And that makes sense when you think about where we are in this cattle cycle, right? In terms of where the cow-calf producer is and the tighter supplies that we're seeing for, in terms of calf prices, feeder cattle prices, those things. So folks are feeling good about the money that's been made, and that's what still looks like is on the table ahead, barring thickening at the border.
Yeah. Canadian dollar, 60, just mid 69s. And I guess here we sit. I honestly, as a avid currency watcher, I've been kind of surprised how the Canadian dollar has hung in there with all this uncertainty from a trade perspective for Canada, China, and the U.S.
Yeah, and in the midst of interest rate cuts, right? So usually we would have seen, and we saw a little bit of that happen, but it rallied right back. And
Another good point.
I think many are looking at that, that usually when you see that interest spread starts to happen, that the Canadian dollar weakens. So again, that will be an interesting one for us to continue to watch. But again, remember, because we're an export nation, when we're selling into Japan or South Korea or the U.S., the weaker Canadian dollar, the lower exchange rate means it's good value for Canadian beef.
I was thinking of, and we'll wrap up with this, and before I let you go, I heard Premier Moe yesterday talk about how, China has put retaliatory tariffs on Canadian canola meal and oil. Premier Moe, in a very passionate speech yet on Thursday, talked about the fact that these canola crush plants in Saskatchewan, they could be shutting down if we can't export meal and oil to China, as an example. We've also got issues with the U.S. At one time we were looking at expanding canola crush capacity, and now these plants are in real jeopardy. I thought of some of our U.S. packing plants that are very reliant on Canadian cattle in the PNW, in states like Utah, for example. It's the same kind of discussion. I wonder if we're going to hear more of that narrative as we continue to hear about tariffs on Canadian products.
Yeah, you wonder about that. Of course, remember, a lot of those plants are part of obviously big corporate facilities. And so, can they shuffle production around the country? So those are the things. But for sure, in terms of individual packing plants, there would be some concern there for sure.
Yeah. Hey, Ann, thanks a lot for joining us here today for the Beef Market Update. Really appreciate it. And we'll chat with you again soon. Okay.
Thanks, Shaun. Have a good day.
If you want more information on what's going on in the cattle industry and to make sure you don't miss any of these beef market updates, go to realagriculture.com/subscribe and get our weekly cattle email. Thanks so much for downloading the RealAg Radio podcast. Do appreciate it very much. If you have any questions, comments, I would love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Or, of course, there always is that RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Have yourselves a great weekend. We'll chat again next week. Cheers, everybody.